struggle with putting yourself first? Are you tired of feeling burnt out and overwhelmed from constantly putting the needs of others before your own? I have created a sacred space that will be available once a week for 10 weeks to learn, dive deep, and create your boundaries to boost your confidence and self-worthiness. Go to www.krista-luna.com and sign up for the Master Your Boundaries course starting in September 2023. And use the code PARANORMAL to get 30% off today on www.crista-luna.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Paranormal the New Normal. I'm your host as always, Jeremy, here trying to make the world seem a little more normal. Does it ever happen? God, no. But we try. That's all that matters. But of course, I'm joined by a guest to help me do that as always. And my guest today is Dylan James Quarles, author of, well, we'll get into what he's author of. But first things first, how you doing tonight, Dylan?
I'm doing really well, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Any paranormal, supernatural author, I'm always down to have on.
That's definitely my wheelhouse. So
you guys usually have good stories. So, but let me ask you the first question I ask everybody on this show.
Okay.
What got you into the paranormal, supernatural world?
I guess it would have to be where I grew up, which is also where I currently reside. It's a little town called Port Townsend. It's in Washington State, a small town. So if you really have like an axe to grind with me, you could probably find me. It's a little town, though, Victorian Seaport, as they say on the sign when you drive into town. It was meant to be much bigger than it ended up being. It's kind of strategically located on the Olympic Peninsula. So back in the day, as they say, it was a hub of logging and mining and shipping and shanghaiing people. So human trafficking and all kinds of nasty stuff went on here. And the town has this really rich history of all this shady stuff that went on here. And then what adds to the paranormal side of it is that the railroad never came here, and the bay wasn't deep enough to support like expanded sort of like shipping interests. So all that stuff went to Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, cities that are maybe a little bit more known outside of Washington State. And that left Port Townsend essentially like frozen, as they say, in amber. So all the old Victorian houses that the ship captains and the robber barons built and used to live in, they're all still here. They didn't get knocked down for new high rises or whatever, or like new apartments or fancy, glass and steel Scandinavian designs or what have you. And the historic downtown, all these brick buildings with like creeping ivy all over them and old cigarette ads painted up on the sides, that's all still here as well. And so what you end up with is a plethora of ghost stories. You have cryptids, because we're in Washington State, so everybody knows about Sasquatch, but they don't know about some of the other more hyper-local cryptids, or the ones that have like a weird connection to the area, even though they don't seem like they would be from here. And on top of that, we have a thriving sort of UFO environment out here too. Maybe a little known fact, maybe not to your listeners, but the phrase or the terminology flying saucer was actually coined in Washington State for a pilot that said he saw something more or less resembling a pie plate. So Washington in general, in this area where I live, is just like paranormal ground zero. You could just take your pick, whatever lane you like, you can get in it and you can cruise it. So that's where I got into this stuff.
Okay, interest definitely peaked, and there's a lot of questions I will have later on about all that. We'll get into something now, because what experiences have you had with the paranormal side of life?
Well, I've had a few ghostly encounters. I saw an apparition once, but it actually wasn't here in Port Townsend or even in the United States. It was in Thailand. And it was in a small village. I traveled to this village as part of like a kind of a team building / cultural outreach, not affiliated with any organization that would be nationally known or any kind of religious organization. But we went to this. Me and a group of friends went to this village in Thailand shortly after graduation from high school, and we taught in the local school, and it was pretty much just a cultural exchange. This small village in the north, and while we were there, and this was in the summer, there was a sort of like a ceremony that took place in the village that was described to us as kind of like a summoning of spirits. So it's like a little bit like their Halloween, but it's in the summer, which is the rainy season there. So everything's a little flipped. And so we're in this like little village, and they do this ceremony. It's kind of hard to describe, but there's masks, and there's this one part of it where there's like a sheet, and it's kind of being held by a lot of people, almost like if you can imagine the parachute game from when you're a kid. Everybody's got a piece of the sheet and they're holding it, and then something that's like popping up in the middle of the sheet, and you're like, what's happening? Like these forms are shaping as they're like invoking these spirits, and it's like, you know, you're seeing sort of like, I guess the idea is like you're seeing these things are starting to pop out into the corporeal plane. The ceremony comes to an end. Our chaperone, or kind of our fearless leader, our guide, he's like gathers everyone around. He says, okay, everybody go home, because we were like living in houses in the village. He goes, go home tonight, and I know you guys get up to trouble, because we would sometimes like sneak out and meet up with each other and have beers and whatever, and do things that, you know, recent high school graduates do. He said, go home tonight and stay indoors. Like, you might not believe what you just saw, you might not believe in any of this, but they do, and that's enough. And that stuck with me, because I really do believe in the power of in belief. So we all went home. We went our separate ways. And that night I heard all these insane sounds. Our house was at the very edge of the village, right near the jungle. So you always hear crazy sounds at night. And this is like rural Thailand. Like, Thailand's fairly rural in points already, but this is very, very rural. So we're hearing all these weird noises, and start to hear squealing pigs, and they're sort of screaming, and they're right beneath our house. Our house was up on stilts, and it sounded like they were just right under the house, and that was really unsettling and spooky. But then I started to hear footsteps coming up the stairs to our front door, and it wasn't uncommon for people to come and like leave us little gifts. So at first, that's what I thought it was, like a villager was coming to drop off like a gift, but it was late, so that was weird to me. But when I heard the footsteps come up the stairs, and then they stopped outside the front door, and then they continued, but this time they were inside the house, and there's no electricity in this house, so it was just black as black can be, dark of night. And we all slept. There was 6 of us in this house. We all slept on the floor on mats in mosquito nets. So you really couldn't see outside of your net, especially when it was dark, because it's like this kind of white, like fine mesh net. I really couldn't see anything, but I heard the steps coming through the living room, and then they sort of stopped right behind me. I was laying on my side, and I rolled over, and I saw this little Thai man just beaming with the biggest smile, and I immediately kind of did the whole like close your eyes, rub them with your fists, you know, like almost do like a Looney Tunes double take, and then he was gone. And when I brought this up the next morning, and I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. I was listening, you know, like Daredevil. I was like, had my ear turned. I was like trying to catch every sound. I brought this up the next morning, and somebody mentioned, oh yeah, that house used to be where they slaughtered pigs in the town. So that's probably what you're hearing. And everybody was so nonchalant about it. Everybody in the village was like, oh yeah, sure, you saw a ghost. No big deal. On with your life. So I was 18. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a ghost. And I'd grown up in this supposedly super haunted Victorian seaport, and I had never been lucky enough to catch a glimpse of a ghost, but I sure did come face to face with one there. So pretty much going forward into college and the rest of my life, I was very open to the idea that not all stories are just stories to kind of bring in tourists or to ensnare your imagination. Sometimes they're powerful enough to make a reality all their own.
Wow. I mean, that's one of those stories that people can't deny. Like, there's no way you could like Yeah, they could say, "Oh, it might have just been a real man that creeped in the house," but
Yeah,
no,
but
he
how did
was.
he get in the house without opening the front door? That's what I always say when people ask me that. They because
Yeah,
I've told that story to skeptics too, and they've kind of been like, okay, because they don't, skeptics are useful and necessary, and I am pro skepticism to a point though.
yeah. I mean, there's being a skeptic, and there's just being a dick. That's the way I put it. That's the way I always put it. But
Yeah, I like that. I actually have that tattooed on my chest. Nobody out there in listener land can see that, but if you're watching, you can see.
uh, and Michael, thank you for stopping by, buddy. I'm sure we will have a good show. But I want to touch on another thing that you kind of touched on because you live in the Olympic Peninsula, and I've had Mark Matsky of Small Town Monsters on here before, and
Okay.
he talked about when they went to the Olympic project doing their Sasquatch research, and
Sure.
of course, Washington is known by all paranormal enthusiasts as a Bigfoot
Yeah.
Sasquatch hotspot.
Yeah.
So, have you ever had any experiences with any part of Sasquatch, whether it be like footprints or anything?
I've got a Sasquatch story. It's a little bit of a 1 degree of separation, but it also. So I worked with a woman who I won't name. Just kidding, Holly. You're out there somewhere. I know you are. Anyway, I worked with her. She lived a little further out the peninsula from where I am, in the direction of Port Angeles and Forks. People will know Forks if you've paid attention to Twilight movies. Which if you haven't, don't bother, just live your life. But so she lived she lived out even further than where I am, where I am is fairly remote. Where she is even more so, and it is way. It's like her property was up this hill on a little mountain out there on a road called Chicken Coop Road, which I always love the name of that. But her property butted right up against DNR lands, which are just endless, massive. If you look at my area where I live, there's like little dots of populated spaces. Like the town I live in is like 10,000 people, so they're not that populated. But then just dominating most of the Olympic Peninsula is either national parks or DNR lands. So it's very, very undeveloped. Isn't even begin to touch what it really is. It's just the way it's always been. You know what I mean? It's like timeless. Untamed. It's part of its allure to a lot of people. So her property butted right up against that. Anyway, was walking her property. She said she learned I was into this shit, and she said she saw something out of the corner of her eye moving, and she turned, and then boom, there it was. Not a bear, which are out here, but not grizzlies, black bears, and they're not that tall. I mean, they stand up and they're tall, but they're not like 10 feet tall. As she described, this thing was enormous. It stank. We're ticking the boxes that people know about. So she said, do you and your wife want to come Sasquatch hunting out at my property? And we were like, fuck yeah, we do. Because my wife is like even more pro Sasquatch than I am. So we went out there and we all proceeded to do what professional Sasquatch hunters should not do, which is to get roaringly drunk and stumble around in the woods. At one point I realized, like, if we actually do come across Sasquatch, like, now no one's going to believe me, like, because I have wine lips, you know what I mean? I'm going to be like trying to tell the news what I saw, and I'm going to get like memed over here. So that's like my Sasquatch stories. Like, she saw Sasquatch. We went to her property. She showed us the area. There was no footprints, and she didn't think to do that because she's not really that into stuff. For her, this was like a life-changing experience. This was like time to put up cameras around the outside of the house because there's like enormous bipedal men who are covered in hair who live in the woods around me. So it's for her, it was a game changer. For me, it was a really fun night of drinking way too much wine in the woods. So that's my Sasquatch story. Hopefully I'll have another here one of these days.
Well, I mean, looking for Sasquatch is always part drinking, in my opinion. Because
I think that goes with, like, before you can get your Sasquatch hunting badge and gun, it's like, what's your blood alcohol level? Oh no, that's too low. Come back after you've had some moonshine.
I mean, me personally, I don't like being in the woods unless I'm drinking because I just see it as a waste of time. But that's me personally. People who like to go in the woods, more power to you.
I'm in the woods and I'm drinking right now.
Well, there you freaking go. But I would be drinking right now, but I kind of fell backwards last night in the bathroom and cracked my head open a little. So, yay.
Oof.
Yeah, fun night. Can't say that ever happened before, but kind of killed the urge to drink tonight. That's for damn sure. But you also mentioned that you have some lesser known cryptids around you, and I'm kind of curious to see what you mean because I could see a few options, but I'm gonna let you kind of tell me what you
All
think they
right.
are.
Okay. So we have the Sasquatch, which is the well-known cryptid out here.
Of course.
Of course, but the Olympic Peninsula is surrounded on three sides by water. For your listeners that don't know what peninsulas are, that's what they are. Um, and with the water comes all number of strange creatures that have either not been categorized by science, are mythical, maybe said to not be real at all, and yet their legend endures. So we have a few cryptids out here that fit that bill. My favorite was the inspiration for one of my more recent horror stories was the Silky, which for your listeners that don't know, it's the shape-shifting sort of mermaid of Celtic lore, which is a seal that can shed its skin or shapeshift into a human. And when they are on land, they have to sort of stash their skin. This is like the rumor, or this is the lore. And and they have to hide their skin, and if you can find it, you can trap them in human form, and you can make them your slave, or you can make them you can get a wish, or whatever the myth may be that you've grown up with. I think the reason that the Silky myth found roots here is because of the fact that at one point Port Townsend was really a bustling hub of trade and commerce, especially with the British Empire. So we had a lot of people of Celtic descent that were passing through the area and settling here. A little known factoid about the area, which will be appearing in one of my other horror short stories, is that the British and the U.S. jockeyed for control of the San Juan Islands, which are just like 30 nautical miles north of me right now, for a long time. And they almost came to, it's called the Pig War. They almost came to open an armed conflict over it. But that's just to highlight that a lot of people of Celtic descent were in the area. So they sort of brought their mythical creatures with them. Yeah. Well, you could say they brought their beliefs, or you could say, as I posit in my story, that they brought their beliefs and they brought a few people who also happened to be Silkies with them. And these people decided for one reason or another that living among the men wasn't worth it, and it was better to return to the sea. And as a sailor, which I am a little, I dabble. I grew up on a sailboat. My folks still own one. So when you're in a boat family, even if you don't own a boat, you're doing boat stuff all the time. So I'm out fairly often on the water, free diving or on the boat, and you do encounter from time to time abnormally large seals who seem to be insanely intelligent beyond your normal seal, which is already they seem pretty smart already. They kind of have these soulful eyes, but every once in a while you'll encounter one that just is downright eerie, or uncanny, how it seems to be looking at you with such intense human intelligence. So the Silky lore, it does live out here, and I love it so much as a concept and as a story that I had to explore it in one of my horror shorts. And I gotta say, it's one of my favorite lesser known cryptids of the area. Another one that I hope to some.
Before you go on to the next one, it's funny because Selkies, were one of the first cryptids I ever learned about.
Oh yeah,
I read a book about them in, I think it was 6th grade. I read a book, I believe it was an Irish book or an English book, but it basically was about a Selkie that it comes on and sheds its skin and becomes a woman, and it makes the stories about a little girl and her brother's falling in love with the Selkie, and she's trying to prove it, but no one believes her because it's like a kid crying Bigfoot in America. So
sure.
So I mean, it was one of the first cryptids I actually ever heard of. So I do, but to find that in Washington, that's kind of funny. I never would imagine that.
Well, I think it's really due to the fact that, like I was mentioning, the fact that this little weird town used to be such a hub of international trade, especially with the British Empire. And the British Empire, again, if your listeners aren't aware, not the nicest people back in the day, and did in fact subjugate the Isle of Ireland for quite a while. So
Yeah.
a lot of Irish people were involved at various levels with British trading companies, crewing ships, captaining ships, and some of them settled here. Some of them just passed through, but for whatever reason, the stories that they brought with them have endured. And the fact that there are just so many seals, harbor seals, bull seals in this area, I think it just sort of like the transfer was very easy, for in terms of sticking it around and keeping that legend around.
Hey, Ray, what's going on, brother? Glad you could watch. So, okay, what was the next one you're going to go to? I'll let you continue now.
Okay, I was going to jump to a hyper localized one. Now, this one was actually brought to me by a friend and my former publisher when I started writing this anthology of horror short stories set in Port Townsend that sort of chronicles these various supernatural and paranormal stories that I grew up imagining and hearing. So he published the first entry in this anthology. It's called A Secret History of Port Townsend. Before I went out on my struck out on my own, got different publishing. But when I was floating the idea to him, he was like, well, someday you got to do a story on King Crow. And I was like, what is this King Crow you speak of? And he started to tell me about these local stories that people have to this day of a raven or a crow that it has like the wingspan of like a small car. People see it and at first they think it's like an eagle that's swooping right over their heads, but in fact they realize that it's not right above them. It's up high in the tree line or moving above the tree line. It's just that big that they thought it was closer, and it's this enormous crow or raven. And we have a lot of ravens out here that are really big. Like they are shockingly big sometimes. I don't think people realize how big a raven can get. And they are really smart. And they have a whole host of interesting sounds they make to communicate with each other. And they're not just ka, they're doing all, it's like impossible to mimic the sort of creepy sounds they can make. So sometimes you're in the woods alone and you'll hear these like really bizarre noises, these clicks and pops and yips and chitters, and it's a raven somewhere, and it's watching you, and it's kind of letting you know, like, I see you. So the myth out here is that there are a few ravens, or one that's called the King Crow, and it's like enormous. It's like big enough to like take a man and fly away with them. So I was telling my wife that my former publisher had mentioned this myth to me, and I was like, yeah, it sounds cool, but I don't know exactly how I turn it into a story. I got to think about it. And this is me percolating, and she goes, oh, I've seen it. And I'm like, stop the presses here. And she starts to relay to me this story, and she didn't know it was a local myth. So when she saw this enormous crow fly over her car as she was driving out one of the country roads here, because there's also farmland that bands the area where I am. We're on the seaport part of the land, but all around us is farmland and then forests and then mountains. So she was driving out through one of these country roads, and this crow, she said it was as big as her car. That's why I used that reference earlier, swooped over the road and up into the trees. And she was totally floored by what she'd seen, but didn't know that there was an existing local like legend around it. So she sort of just like almost kept it to herself. It's almost like one of those things where once a doctor tells you what your illness is, you feel better about talking about it. But when you don't know what it is that's making you sick kind of deal, you just keep it to yourself. So it's like she sort of was like, I know, she was like, I saw the King Crow. To me, that was like, okay, now I need to do more investigations. And I have put out the feelers. I talked to my old publisher, and I've talked to some others in the area where it was seen, where my wife said she saw it, and it seems to be in that area. And it's a totally weird, very mystical area, I have to say. It doesn't look like America. It honestly looks like Ireland. I've been to Ireland. It looks a lot like Ireland out in these rolling farmlands with these pockets of woods that are ancient, just like totally untouched and timeless. So a few people out there have kind of started pointing me in the direction. Get this, it's mile marker 66. So that's kind of weird, right? Like we're one off. So somewhere out around there on this road that runs out through the farmland, is where a lot of the sightings seem to be like localized. So when I finish with the short story I'm currently working on for Secret History of Port Townsend, I'm thinking probably not the next installation, because I have to return to witchcraft lore, but the one after, I'm going to dive back into cryptid land, and I'm going to find out about what I can about King Crow, and sort of like see if I can bring King Crow to a national stage, because I think it's kind of a neat idea.
It is a neat idea, and I mean, but giant birds are not, of course, unheard of in the paranormal world. I mean,
they're not, right? Which is why
you being that close to the Southwest, it makes me think of it. Maybe it's a version of a thunderbird.
Right. Well, there's a Tlingit, which is a tribe from British Columbia, which is so close to where I am right now, British Columbia, Canada, that when I go walking on North Beach, my cell phone will shoot me a text from T-Mobile letting me know I'm now in Canada. So the Tlingit have the legend of the Quarles, which is a giant, not eagle, but giant bird. So, and it's not an eagle, which we have those in spades out here. So it's interesting that even the local native tribes have myths of humongous, sort of supernatural birds. So I don't know if King Crow falls into that, because I haven't seen it, but you could imagine, because the Quarles is usually described as being way more colorful, but like a crow's feathers have that oily quality. So you could imagine if the light hit a crow right, it might have like this gasoline sheen that could appear as more colorful than if it was in shadow, like when my wife saw it swooping through the trees over the road.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of thunderbirds, which thunderbirds to me, my theory on them has always been that they are, at least in the Southwest, pterodactyls because of the cave systems out west. And
I thought you were gonna say a UFO.
No, I think I can believe that there are big birds that somehow survived extinction from the prehistoric age, or they just have always been there and we didn't know about it. And with people might have seen them, but they might not think anything of it when they were settling the West. It might have just been a new creature to them.
Well, when you go out on it, have you ever been out to the Navajo reservation? It's huge. It's unbelievably big. Like we used to go a lot as a family, and there is no question in my mind that there are corners of the reservation where human beings have never set foot.
I'm sure, and I mean, there's a lot of still unexplored land out there on the West Coast, especially because it's the newest coast, and a lot of it's desert, a lot of it's just woods, places people are not going to go to explore unless they have a reason to. So
yeah, West Coast, best coast.
Debatable, but no, the only place out west I've ever been is Vegas, and we didn't really leave the city. So
I wouldn't call that quite the West. That's getting out there. That's Westy. It's Westish.
It was a vacation spot as a teenager, and I wasn't complaining.
Yeah, right. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Is there any more cryptids? Oh yeah, night crawlers. I had somebody tell me about night crawlers out here once. They said they saw a night.
The Fresno night crawlers. Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody out here. They told me as a kid. Actually, similar area where my wife was driving was where this person claimed to have looked out their car window at night and seen a giant pair of pants walking across a field, as they described it. And that stuck in my mind because I mean it's like so bizarre. It almost has to be true. They didn't say anything fantastic. Actually, though, I have heard in that same area, it's a really like I said, it's a very mystical area. I have also heard people speak of seeing a giant in that area too, but those reports are unconfirmed. But I'm so fascinated with that idea. I love the idea of giants. And we all know that there's a rich history in the paranormal world of giants and like what they might hint at and all that jazz. So, and I could totally believe that if they were anywhere to hide, it would be out in those woods. Because I mean, like I said, it's like farmland, foothills, and then national park mountains where it's like pretty fucking rugged. But the night crawler stuck in my mind because it was just like so bizarre to hear as a kid. And then years and years later, as I started to get into paranormal stuff, I learned that they are actually a thing. And that just kind of like blew my lid. So apparently we have night crawlers here as well. I've only ever gotten one report of those though.
I mean, night crawlers are one of those lesser known. I mean, they're known
Hmm.
because of people spraying them,
Yeah.
but I mean, I don't know. I just feel like it's. I honestly don't know what that could be. I mean, if it's a ghostly type thing where it's an apparition and it's just like the bottom half of a
Yeah.
it's a
It's
of a
so
ghost.
weird, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah,
like
it is. I
it's
mean,
just legs. You're just seeing a giant pair of legs walking around. It's
but
like, what is
then
that?
again, I've heard stories too in big cities where people have seen like something running beside their car, and it's just like they say it's a ghost, but it's just the legs, and like they just see the legs running. Like I think the one caller on one of my favorite podcasts, they said it looked like a pair of jeans running down the road in legs.
That's what this woman described it as. It was a pair of pants, she said. She didn't say it was legs. It wasn't like knobbly knees and hairy calves and big floppy feet. It was a pair of pants walking across a field. And when you see footage of night crawlers, uh, that's what it looks like. It looks like almost like one of those, it looks like almost like a wacky wailing inflatable arm tube man kind of situation. These big tubey pants walking along. So I don't know. I don't want to go off into the woods about night crawlers, although I would like to maybe someday go into the woods looking for a night crawler. But it's around the same area where people have said they've seen a giant. So I don't know how much I want to fuck around and find out, to be honest. Because I think
Well,
night crawlers sometimes have kind of a negative connotation, like they're oftentimes around where there are like dead bodies or something like that.
possible, and I mean, I can't say I've heard that tie, but it's very possible. A lot of paranormal things are linked to creepy aspects of life, but
Mm-hmm.
giants are fascinating. Like there are so many tales and newspaper clippings, even from the 1900s, of
Yeah.
giant skeletons found all over the United States, and of course, the Smithsonian or the
Yes,
government
you always
comes
hear
and
about
grabs
that.
them.
Yeah, they
So
tamp down on it, just like the I'm gonna get it wrong, so I won't even attempt it. But just like the fascinating story about the prospector, I believe, that was traveling down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon and saw a cave high up on the canyon wall and put in his boat and then scrabbled up this cliff to the cave and went in and found this massive cave network that was full of all these incredible artifacts and Egyptian sarcophagi and treasure and all kinds of uh, sort of gray alien looking mummies, and then he went and told people what he'd found, and then the Smithsonian came and supposedly gathered all of it up, and that was that. But that
yeah,
story's always stuck out. It's sort of like, isn't it like Mount Shasta, like the Smithsonian? I'm using air quotes again. Was sort of supposed to be kind of involved, whereas like the Men in Black in that situation too, right? Like they always show up and then all evidence disappears.
well, I mean, they're the same thing basically, but I mean, the Men in Black are known nowadays as khaki men because
Yeah,
they want to look like the basic human male, and human males don't go around wearing suits anymore like they used to. So now it's easier to dress like a dad in his 40s and just wear a Bermuda shirt and khaki shorts, and that way you
yes.
blend in. So,
Except for like the reports that they're like hairless and really creepy.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's why I said human because I don't think Men in Black are all human. I think it's kind of like I think the comic books and the movies got it kind of right. Like they had a source, I think the comic books did at least, and I think that led to the movies. But because I think there's aliens and humans working in conjunction to try and put
Sure.
a damper on things, which makes sense, you know. X-Files
Yeah.
was right. Could have called
No,
it.
yeah, I mean, I subscribe to that conspiracy theory as well. I personally think it's it's more believable than, I mean, our government, no offense if you're a listener and you work in the government, but I don't our government's not really competent enough to run that sort of full scale sort of operation where they keep a lid on things like that. So I think if they are running it, they got help from somebody who's a lot more good at
Intelligent,
that kind
yeah.
of keeping a lid on things and keeping things running smoothly.
And Joanne, yes, I can imagine what they would say to have the finders shut up and keep their mouth shut. Like I 100% imagine what the government will tell them or threaten them with. And there are plenty of examples where supposed people who they were working with to do extraterrestrial research, all of a sudden that person's gone mentally insane and is in an asylum because something happened, and the it's usually because they're getting close to finding answers, and the government shut them up permanently. All it takes is one injection of one of their magical concoctions. So who knows? I mean, but yeah, giants fascinate the hell out of me. I mean, I on my other podcast I do with my co-host, we did a whole episode on giants. Like, there's just so many examples of all over the world. I mean, the the Kandar giant, I think it is, or it's some city in Iraq.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this one. Yeah,
and supposedly the Iraqi army killed it.
Yeah,
but yet all of a sudden the government takes away the body and they disappear. So
yeah, I did hear something about that on the tubes or the TikToks. I think I saw something about that one. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly remote parts of the world, like, just how a Sasquatch myth can endure because of the area where they're said to exist is so remote and so rugged. There are other places in the world that also meet those requirements where a legend can endure because maybe there's more to it than just hearsay and folklore.
There's always more to it, except for a few examples, which I'll name in a second. But have you heard about this there, Dylan? Because this is your area of the woods. Joanne says, what about that kid from British Columbia, Canada, that's gone?
Well, I don't know exactly which one you mean. I need a little bit more to go on.
I'm assuming it's related to giants.
If it's related to giants, then I would love to find out more. I know that on the human side of things, the human side of the monster world, we are said to have a higher number of active serial killers in my neck of the woods than most parts of America because it's much easier to hide a body out here. This is just what they say.
I know what you're talking about. There was a picture that was released, and some people think it's a Bigfoot on top of mountains. People think it's a giant on top of a mountain, and I mean, I've seen multiple different versions of this picture, so I don't know.
Yeah. But... Okay, I know the story too. And the guy, he filmed it from his car, right? And when he was driving, he put it up on TikTok, and then he started being harassed by people in black cars that were coming around, and he would film them. And then he sort of went radio silent for a while, and then I think he came back with a video that was like, oh, never mind, it was just a weather station or something like that. And then he disappeared. This is the story, at least.
Yeah, it's not the cops that stopped him. It's the damn government. They just might have been paying the cops to do it, but the government pays cops regardless. So, I mean, but it was definitely not just cops. It was some high up government figures that want to get rid of people who say stuff like that, and they quieted them up. I mean, you can only be threatened for so long before they replace you with a doppelganger. That's always possible too.
A clone.
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it this way. Reptilians, which you want to talk about the cave where they found the Egyptian style tombs and stuff on the West Coast, that's right up the reptilian storyline. That's one of the caves that connected to the reptilian city beneath the West Coast. So, especially LA. And reptilians can take on human faces as they wish.
Sure. I've seen the videos.
I have too, and I'm not saying I believe every single freaking one of them, but there are definitely some out there that have maybe like questioning things. There was some news anchor, I forget which one it was, but they did like a slow-mo of him do it on camera, and he, like, if you slow it down and then he paused the right point, you could see his eyes look reptilian like.
Yeah, he's up like this instead. It's like there's a little glitch, and you can see it looks like his eyes blink the wrong way, like sideways, kind of.
It's a glitch in the Matrix, kind of, but it's just, I don't know.
I get a lot of I do a lot of marketing on TikTok. I make a lot of videos for books. And I am in Washington State, the Olympic Peninsula, Joanne. Joanne asked, where am I at? So Washington State, Olympic Peninsula, which is about as Pacific Northwest as you can get and still be in the continental United States. Anyway, so I do a lot of TikTok. I make a lot of videos for my books on TikTok. And I usually kind of take like a vaguely sort of like unsolved mysteries approach because it's like what best kind of it kind of best relays the vibe that the books are going to have, the stories. And I have one story that's about these two guys, and they get lost in the underground tunnels and chambers which exist here in my town in Port Townsend, because the military came here in the late 1800s, early 19s, and they built a huge military fortification called Fort Worden. It was part of a triangle of bases that they made uh, on Port Townsend and then a couple of adjacent islands across the water. The idea was that no ship or submarine could enter into the Puget Sound without being in direct, um, coming under direct fire from at least two of these bases. So Port Townsend's one, where one of them is Fort Worden. And they dug hundreds and hundreds of miles of tunnels and bunkers, and they built all these crazy bunkers that are up in the hills. And now it's a state park. It's called Fort Worden State Park. I highly recommend that you check it out if you're ever in the area, or that you make a trip here if you're not in the area, just to see it, because it is truly a wonder. It's basically a ruined city in the woods that was built by the military, all concrete. And there are numerous points at which you can access these tunnels that go deep, deep, deep into the hill and connect to bunkers that are down at the beach, So we're talking, steep, deep tunnels and bunkers and chambers underground. So I wrote a story about, because I grew up here exploring them with my friends, as people do. And there are ghost stories. There are witch cult stories. There's everything you can imagine people have seen happening in those tunnels. Because it's just so creepy. It's absolute darkness. A lot of them are flooded now, but you could still get in to most of them. Some of the dangerous ones they've sort of sealed up. So I write this story that's about that happening. These two guys going in, and they find a tunnel that they've been looking for that's supposed to be sealed, but they find a way in, and then they get lost, and then they find something there deep. You want to talk about giants? I don't want to give away, but they do find something. Let's just say that deep, deep, deep in the ground. That is sort of the reason why the area is so haunted. That's like their whole mission, is to like find out why so many houses and everything is so haunted around here in Port Townsend, because people believe there's a vortex in town, a supernatural vortex. So these guys go to find the epicenter, and they find it deep under Fort Worden in these tunnels. So I write the story. It's a good story. I like it. I stand by it. But as I'm marketing it on TikTok, I'm making videos and I'm talking about tunnels, chambers, and caves, and it gets like totally hijacked every time by people who are really obsessed with the reptilian conspiracy theory. And I want to be like, guys, this is not that story. Take your reptilians, put them somewhere else. This is a different, not every cave is a reptilian. Some caves might be, but some caves are just caves. Some caves have giants in them, or cults. So, sprinkle a little bit of that on your Amazon wish list if you're in the mood for reading a story about two guys lost in the underground. But yeah, that's my random reptilian story lately. It's my most recent interaction with the reptilian cohort, is that they all seem to think that's what I'm talking about. But
which I was going to ask you, because you mentioned witches earlier, and I was like, there are stories of witches in Washington? Like, this is something that I've not really come across. It's
the same deal like I mentioned with the Silkies. It's because Port Townsend was once this hub of trade and commerce and culture. Anytime that happens, people from all over the world are passing through or settling here to establish their own little empires. There are. I have a friend. He's still alive. I shouldn't speak of him in the past tense. I might give you the wrong idea. But his story about the bunkers at Fort Worden is what we call them. We call them the bunkers. So there's some local nomenclature for you. His story about the bunkers was that when he was exploring them in high school with a friend, they heard chanting. So they went to explore and examine where this chanting might be coming from. And they came upon what they could only describe as a group of hooded figures deep in one of these chambers, which were built by the military. So they're not like Gothic. If you can imagine the architecture as fairly brutalist, efficient. But they were there. Maybe it's because they were drawn by some of the energies that are in the area, which there certainly are energies here in this area. Like, I really cannot understate that. Like, this is a very haunted area. And the reason that I start my secret history series with the story of the two guys trying to find the epicenter of the vortex is because I needed to immediately set the record straight that I think there is a reason why this area in particular has such an intense draw on people who are hoping to either tap into that energy or just experience it on some level. So his story was that he and his friend came upon a group of hooded figures performing some kind of ritual deep in the tunnels under Fort Worden. And of course, they turned tail and they shagged ass out of there because they didn't want to end up on the cutting block. You know what I mean? And that story, which was relayed to me in high school, stuck with me for, obviously, here I am many years later. I'm not in high school anymore. I don't know if you can see me, but I just had to pay homage to it and to kind of kick the hornet's nest a little bit, because I've always sort of believed, and like this, I don't want to get in trouble. Like, my town is so small. So if you are one of these poor Townsend witches, these power broking witches, like, don't come at me. I rent. I don't have anything. You can't take anything from me. But like, I've always sort of believed that there is like a group of power brokers, you know, that are sort of running the show a little bit, in terms of getting shit done, staying always in power, staying always in control, even though the times change and social movements come and go. They are always on the hill. They always live on the hill. They always live on the tall hill in the old houses. They always have money. You know, it's like, so combining that sort of feeling I've always had living here, is I don't live on the hill. With my friend's story, I had to do a story about witches, or like an occult group that is, you know, summoning or drawing power from these ancient forces that are here in the area. And again, I don't want to give spoilers away, but like, you know, races that came before the race of men, creatures that could have come from the stars, beings that might be older than the earth, or maybe beings that came from somewhere far beyond and settled here, you know, sort of vibes like that. Like, you get into the weeds a little there, but I do like H.P. Lovecraft and the idea that sometimes what we might be thinking of as a demon might just be an alien that we don't understand, a very old alien that died, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are actually a lot of people that believe that angels and demons are just different
just aliens. Yeah. I'm an ancient astronaut guy. I'll almost always tie everything back to the ancient astronaut theory, because that's my bread and butter.
Well,
so
let me tell you a theory I have, because if it ends up in a short story, I'm not going to be too disappointed, but we'll see. I have this theory, and I, to life, me, can't remember if I heard it somewhere or if I just created it in my own head, which is highly possible, knowing my head. But I've said it in my show before, so it's not like it's a secret. I basically have a theory that Earth is a prison planet of sorts, and that there's a international galactic UN out there, call it Dupe, call it whatever you want to call it, based on any sci-fi show you watch, and basically any species that they deem too dangerous or that they get sick of, this council puts on Earth and possibly other planets as prisoners. And that would explain many cryptids we have, such as Bigfoot, dogmen, and lake monsters. Like, it could explain a lot of different cryptids that are in mass, not just one or two sightings here and there.
Sure.
And the biggest part, this is what gets everybody, the UFOs we see in the sky are prison wardens.
They're like guards.
They're guards, making sure that nothing escapes Earth, and also and they work with the Men in Black in that aspect as well. But they also, and why do you think Bigfoots and UFOs are often seen together?
Yeah, right. I've heard this connection before. Not exactly the way you're describing, but I've heard that there's a Bigfoot UFO.
I mean, basically, I'm pretty sure I put this theory together just based on a lot of other smaller like connections, and I kind of combined it all into one. But here's the kicker: what if humans are just prisoners from another?
You mean planet? Like we came from somewhere else too?
Yep. I mean, there's that this isn't really related, but I've seen it in recent years, so I like to bring it up when I tell the theory. There's that meme on Facebook. What if Adam and Eve were the last humans of a dying race on Mars, and they crash landed on Earth?
Yeah.
Like that, just the idea behind that. Like, I don't believe they actually came from Mars. I don't think we came from Mars, and by any means, but it's possible. It's possible, but somewhere out there we might have came from.
there was a no. Okay, so a couple things on that. Like one, I applaud your originality because I have heard plenty in the ancient astronaut community, of which I am a casual sort of fringe observer, but secret acolyte. It makes its way into like almost all of my work, like including the short story I'm working on right now, which is part 4 of the Secret History series. I'm bringing in aliens, and I'm starting to tie these threads together from the other stories, kind of hinting at like that earlier hypothesis I had, which was like, maybe supernatural stuff is only supernatural because we are in the presence of different forms of life. And if a human being can turn into a ghost when it dies, what happens when an alien dies, right? What kind of ghost does that become, right? Like, so anyway, so I applaud your originality because I have heard in the ancient astronaut community, sort of the inverse of that Earth is this special, I hear it all the time, the super special planet that's like so beautiful and unique among planets that have intelligent life. And that's why the aliens are always coming here, because they're like, this is like one of a kind. And that sort of, I feel like gets its, that has its roots in the, that has its roots in like eco activism a little bit. Like that's almost like a little bit of a metaphor for like, we need to preserve what we have, like, which I agree with. I am all for like, hey, I believe in a lot of conspiracy theories. Global warming is not a fucking conspiracy theory. It's actually real. We could call it climate change, call it whatever the fuck you want. But like that's happening. And the people that tell you that it's not, they're the ones who have a secret agenda. They're the ones you should not believe, because they're the ones that have all the fucking money. So never believe the people who have all the fucking money, because they're the pieces of shit in this world. Signed and dated. Anyway, so I like that you're flipping the script. Instead of Earth being this totally unique place that all the aliens want to see because their home planets are like boring or drab, it's actually like the dump where they just send all the worst creatures that they don't want to deal with. So that's kind of fun. I gotta say, I won't steal it from you, but I do like it.
I would honestly be honored. I mean, a small fee buys a story. Just saying, but I mean, honestly, I freaking give it to you for free. I'd be honored. But
I'm a Mars guy, though. I like the Mars idea. I don't think that we are Martians, but I think it's a cool. I mean, I believe. I mean, I was massively inspired as a youngster by the pyramids on Mars. Yeah. And the face on Mars. That inspired. I mean, like easily my most popular books ever are called The Ruins of Mars. It's called The Ruins of Mars trilogy. It's 3 books, and that's all about finding ruins on Mars and exploring them. And those books were massively popular when they came out, and continue to be really to do well and pay the bills, sort of. But so I could never hear Mars aliens or Mars and ancient aliens in the same sort of like few sentences and not like say like, oh, I actually kind of believe in that one too. Like, do I think we came from Mars? No, but do I think it's possible that the Martians maybe survived whatever cataclysm it is that wiped out their planet and have existed in a different form, like maybe moving about the stars, the solar system? Yeah, totally. Because look at what fucking Elon Musk and all these pieces of shit are doing here with Earth. They're trying to figure out how to move the human race into space when the planet dies for the long-term, preservation of the species. So do I think aliens might have tried that sometime too? Yeah, why not?
Well, we talked about most of your books, or your 2 series at least, but I'm kind of interested in as well, and I want to make sure we get a little time to talk about them before we have to end here. But what is There Be Monsters about? I mean, I can imagine what it's about, but I'm kind of curious to what your goal was.
Yeah. Okay, so like all my books have a conspiracy theory kernel in them, a seed from which everything more or less grows, because this is who I am and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Like The Ruins of Mars, it was like I just mentioned, the face on Mars, the pyramids on Mars. That's what inspired the story. And that's what drove a lot of like that book has a really heavy and overt ancient astronaut theory bent to it. And that's, I think, why it's popular. There Be Monsters is my most recent novel, Best Indie Book Award winner. So that's validation. The conspiracy theory that inspired that book was the Philadelphia Project, which I have loved hearing about since it first came across my news desk, in so much as I have one. And I was just fascinated by the idea of this battleship, because it has all these elements that help to really build a strong conspiracy theory. You know, it has multiple people involved, multiple witnesses, if you will. It has the military industrial complex. It has Nikola Tesla. It has time travel. It has teleportation. It has all these things. So that was the kernel that inspired There Be Monsters, which is the story of a group of 1520s treasure hunters, more or less. This ragtag team of interesting characters who set off to find an island that they have heard about that's in the New World. And I won't go into the minutia, but you know, there's interesting things that help move them towards this island that they have its location. And the island supposedly has the ruins of a lost city on it. And the city, according to the witnesses who are driving them on their quest, is made of gold. So I'm kind of playing with Atlantis a little bit, because the New World at that time, the 1500s, would have been like South America, Cuba. We're getting into the Bermuda Triangle area a little bit, right? So they set off to find this maybe mythical island. There's a parallel timeline that's taking place in the book, though, that's in 1985. And I have a government black book, you know, off the record government experimentation taking place on this vessel. And they're messing around with like alien relics that they've recovered through shady means. And by screwing around with these alien relics, they inadvertently sort of tear a hole in space-time, and they send the ship back in time, and also end up unleashing these man-eating monsters that they have been, I'm giving away way too many spoilers, but whatever. They have been, because this ship that the government's been operating in international waters, doing all these horrible experiments, among other things, besides just tinkering with alien relics that they don't know how powerful they are. They were also messing around with genetic manipulation and growing, you know, creatures for various reasons. So these creatures are set loose, and all hell breaks loose, and it all kind of comes to a head. It all clashes together when my protagonist from 1985 realizes that she's been transported back in time. Everybody on her ship has been massacred by these monsters, and now she has to team up with these treasure hunters and try to survive, you know, using only like old world technology and fighting back against these monsters. And also I throw in some conquistadors, and I throw in some stuff from the mystery schools because I can't help myself. And we have prophecies, and we have Atlantis, and we do it all. It's all there. I mean, somebody described the book as a batshit crazy tale. And I don't, it was a reviewer, and I don't disagree. It is batshit crazy. I throw everything at the wall, and somehow it sticks, hence the Best Indie Book Award. So if you're into like treasure hunting, time travel, monsters, aliens, female leads, male main characters, mystery schools, prophecies, you know, islands, ruins, it's all there for you. Oh, conquistadors.
Oh, who doesn't know some conquistadors? But sounds amazing. But and then you had one last book that when I first saw it, I thought it was like a James Bond type book, but then I kind of read into it and I realized I was wrong.
Yeah.
And that's The Man from Rome. I kind of was like, at first I'm like, is this like a James Bond spy book? And then I started reading it.
It's like, a little like that, yeah. It's written like that. So this was that was like my vibe that I was going for. I wanted to write like a not quite Ian Fleming level James Bond or Le Carré like a spy novel, but I wanted to write a spy novel more or less, except for in Rome, because I love Rome and I've been to Rome many times. Except for there was a heavy supernatural event, but the supernatural elements in the book are explored in a way that's like it's been mythologized. Like the man from Rome, the titular character, is an unnamed immortal who's been living in Rome for presumably a very, very long time. And he purposely does not give himself a name because he does not want to be worshipped like some of these other beings, which are similar to him, that have come to Earth over the ages that do want to be worshipped and do give themselves names like Artemis and Zeus and Apollo and Athena and on and on. He is like them, and they are not gods. They're just something else from somewhere else. And because they are something else from somewhere else, they have these seemingly magical abilities, but it's not magic. It's just, we just don't understand it. It's just not of this world. So even though it has a mythology bent to it, and then there's immortals and there's all that kind of stuff, and there's a lot of nods to Greek mythology and Roman mythology because I'm a fan. At the end of the day, the man from Rome very clearly tells this guy who works for him, the main character, like, listen, I'm not a god. Okay. Like, I just come from somewhere you can't comprehend, but it is a place and it does exist. And now I'm here. And so this is why I am the way I am. And you just need to learn to move on with it. So it's written like a spy novel, but you have immortals and you have like all this like crazy shit going on, and it's super violent. So that's I need to put that out there front and center because I have had people complain about how violent it is. Like I sell it as urban fantasy, which is apparently kind of sort of maybe more of a tame genre. I don't know. It's a weird one. So I've had people be like, I thought this was going to be like a romance novel between like a lady and an ancient immortal, sexy immortal. And it ended up being like people ripping each other's spines out and shooting the shit out of like all these Roman police. So I don't know what the hell is going on in this book, but I think it's a good time. And it sure makes for one hell of an audiobook if that's the way you like to enjoy a story.
Do people not think Mortal Kombat is sexy? What the hell?
I know. What's wrong with these people is all I got to say. Like, I think it's cool as hell.
And Rob, what's going on, buddy? Oh, you call me sweetie. You're so sweet. But the head of my network there, he's a little fun. But so where can the people find these books, and where can they follow you if they want to follow you?
You can find everything on Amazon because you can find everything on Amazon. It's A to Z. It's in the name. You can also ask your local bookstore. And if they don't have it in stock, they will get it for you because bookstores do that. So I encourage you to do it that way because bookstores are awesome. And they're a bedrock of Western civilization in general, not even Western. We'll just open it up. So you can find me on Amazon, or you can ask a bookstore, your local book vendor, and they'll get you a copy, whichever one you want. There is, as you mentioned, there's The Man from Rome, there's the Ruins of Mars trilogy, and now There Be Monsters. And then on the short story side of things, we've got the Secret History of Port Townsend series, which so far there's 3 parts. Part 1 is the one about Fort Worden and the guys getting lost and finding mysterious things underground. And part 2 is about Silkies. Part 3 is about witches. Part 4 is coming out soon. It's about UFOs in the military industrial complex, which we have here in this area. We didn't even talk about it, but I don't want to visit from the men in khaki men, but we have a lot of military stuff out here. So you can find that all on Amazon. If you want to follow me, I'm on Facebook, Dylan James Quarles. It's hard to spell, but it's Quarles, like a guy fighting, but with one less R. I'm also on TikTok at author Dylan James Quarles, and I'm having a lot of fun over there. I make a lot of content that's about this area where I live and some of the spooky stuff that goes in here and ties into my books, but it's just been doing really well with people because there's a lot of interest in the area where I live. And so I love to shine a spotlight on some of the dark corners, as they say.
Best way to do it. And all my listeners know you can find me and this podcast on all podcatchers. And please like and subscribe while you're there. And also you can find us on Facebook as Paranormal the New Normal / Maniacal Music Musings, name to be changed soon, podcast group. You can find me on Twitter and the Gram as @JuggaloBastard. And you can find me on TikTok as @JuggaloBastard Podcast. And of course, you can find me on YouTube as Paranormal the New Normal, where this is currently streaming, among other places. And we are, of course, part of the Antisocial and Parapost Network, and we're glad to be part of both. And until next time, thank you, Dylan, for coming on one. That was definitely awesome, and maybe we'll have you on in the future at some point when you have a couple more things out, and we can talk about them. And
yeah, just call me. You got my number now.
Yes, I do. And to all my watchers, thank you for watching. To all my listeners, I'll see you in half a week. Till then, have a good week and try not to get kidnapped by giants. That's what we're aiming for.